Director Al Shepston. And welcome to the Bob Donewald Show. Fresh off of a victory over the Tulsa Golden Hurricane, the team that loses 3 times in one season, 2 of them to Illinois State, 91-81 at Horton Fieldhouse yesterday. Very briefly before we get on with the rest of our show, give me your overall impressions of the game.
Well, it wasn't, I don't think, quite as well played from our perspective as the game there relative to handling the press. I thought at times we went too quickly and kind of got out of control. Other than that, I thought there was a lot of similarities. They did a very good job on the offensive board and created a lot of problems for us. Ross and Harris continued to create problems for us. Vanley had a much better basketball game here than there. We got a variety of people involved in the scoring, and Mark Zwart really had a fine second half. And then we just kept scoring enough to not necessarily stay on top, but stay in the game. And then we went through a stretch very late in the contest where we got the lead and knocked in a couple of baskets and then got to go to the free throw line a lot. I thought it was about as close a ball game as there. It was a 6-point ball game there. And I think for all practical purposes, it was probably between a 3 and a 5-point game here.
91-81 was the final, and it puts both teams at 11-3 in the conference. It also puts Illinois State with a home court advantage if they continue to win in the postseason tournament. We'll talk more about it. Some of the individuals in the, first of all, for Tulsa Golden Hurricane, Ricky Ross, now he hits 10 out of 23, but I think the most important thing is it seemed like he was hitting everything in sight, but I think that's because when the game was really on the line, he comes down and he's just a 10.5.
Well, not only that, but I think many of the shots he missed, they get the rebound and put them back in. But I was surprised at his shooting percentage after the ball game. I thought he had shot the ball much better than that. He did dominate. He dominated the ball. I think that in the ball game there, he got, of course, in foul trouble and eventually fouled out. And I think he was very conscious of trying to rectify or to do a much better job. Of course, he doesn't get in foul trouble today at all. He gets 1 foul, I think, in the ball game. Other than that, he dominated play and going down the stretch. Yeah, he looked to score constantly. Harris knocked in a couple late in the contest. But I think Harris, to a certain extent, was out of it because of the dominance of the ball by Ricky, and that's not a criticism. That's just the way the game was played. He didn't have an exceptionally good game, but of course, as we've already touched on, Vanley had an extraordinarily good game. Now he got thrown out with 17 minutes to go in Tulsa for a cheap shot to Mark Zwart's head. This game, that didn't happen, and as a result of that, his presence was felt the entire afternoon. He made baskets, and he didn't get a lot of rebounds, but he made baskets and went to the free throw line and knocked those in. Johnson wasn't quite as effective around the basket, but didn't have to be really, Al, because Vanley was in there, and as a result of that, he found himself out on the floor a little bit more. The rebounding was fairly comparable. They got 23 offensive rebounds on us there. They got 21 here, and overall, their bench, and they play a lot of people, and none of them had an extraordinarily good ball game. And of course, we play a lot fewer people. We're not as deep as they are, and it was imperative. I elected to go with the 6, and Billy came in and played a little bit for us in the first half, but I elected to go with that 6 because that's the way we've gone all year, and there wasn't anybody in desperate foul trouble, and I thought, well, we'll just, those are the ones that got us to it, so, got us to this point, so let's stay with them.
I think from a Redbird standpoint, too, I really have a hard time singling out any one person in this ball game. Everybody had a role, and I thought everybody filled it to the maximum, and then Mark Zwart, you don't usually look to him to score, but he scores 16 for you, and just a umpteen of those in the second half.
Well, see, a lot of that scoring is a direct result of the way they play, and they come out and they attack you all over the floor. And, any defense gives up something in order to get something. Well, what they will give up is some baskets around the basket in order to try and harass you and press you out all over the floor. It affected us at times. It really did. Not only did they steal it, but we made some really foolish decisions and got ourselves stranded in midair trying to decide what we were going to do with the ball. And so it was somewhat effective. But by the same token, it also created lanes, and Mark did a very fine job, you're right, in the second half of taking the ball and going to the basket in very close quarters. And it didn't make any difference. First they had Ross on him, and then I noticed that he rotated Ross to the perimeter. and brought Vanley and Johnson in there, but he still got enough angles and still got the ball to the bucket and got the ball in the basket, and no question about that. That was critical for us.
Michael McKinney, again, down there he scores 26 points. Here he does not score that many points, but I think just the general way he attacked the press or the pressure outside, I thought he was one of the key points in getting Mark open when he would penetrate and they would rotate up and he'd get it down to them, or anybody for that matter in the middle.
No, that's very accurate. And Michael has 7 assists and 4 turnovers, but of the 4 turnovers, 2 of them happen right in succession when they're in a 2-3 zone. He goes on the baseline to Mark, and Mark didn't react, but they weren't together, and it goes out of bounds, and then Brad's looking the other way, and he just throws it away. And so if you eliminate those 2 turnovers, which really weren't as a result of the press, he's got 7 assists and 2 turnovers. That's a pretty good assist-turnover ratio. And then he did hit just an unbelievably big basket on the baseline in the second half when we were 3 up. He did play well. It wasn't extraordinary. He wasn't as good in all facets of the game as he was in Tulsa, but you can't expect a youngster to do that. But I agree, he was very critical. We took him out, made a very critical or very significant contribution, I should say. We took him out one time in the second half because I thought he was fatiguing, and I let him just catch his breath for a couple minutes, and then I had Brad and Ricky on the floor, and then brought him back onto the floor. But other than that, pretty much the ball was in his hands in so many different situations.
91-81 is the final. Let's take a look at the highlights.
It was a game that stayed close most of the way. Tulsa never led by more than 3, and the Redbirds had a 10-point lead at one time in the second half at 48-38. But you don't count that as a good lead against a team as explosive as the Golden Hurricane. Tulsa eventually came back and even went up 63-60. However, the Redbirds hitched up their bounce and went back ahead at 64-63. After that, it was seesaw, with Ricky Ross doing most of the damage for Tulsa. He was virtually impossible to stop, and even when he did miss, Tulsa was there to get the offensive rebound. The 2 teams continued to trade baskets. Everyone contributed in that run for Illinois State. Hank Corley leaves his role for a short time here, leading a fast break. Mark Zwart hit several of the key baskets, but it was at 71-70 when the biggest play came. Illinois State stopped Tulsa. Ricky Johnson rebounds. Then Michael McKinney at the other end hits a clutch basket, and now, even if the 2 teams trade baskets, Illinois State would never lose the lead. From here on out, it was a matter of hanging tough for the final 4 minutes. Hank Corley had 25 points, Ricky Johnson 18, Mark Zwart and Michael McKinney 16 each. The 3 guards handed out 15 assists between them. Illinois State came up with a gutsy 91-81 win over 9th-ranked Golden Hurricane of Tulsa.
Again, with that win, Illinois State is 11-3. They are co-champions of the Missouri Valley Conference, the first year that Illinois State, by the way, is champions after only 3 years in the conference. We'll be back and talk about another game that got them there on Thursday night right after this. I'd like to talk about Tulsa all day long, but the plain and simple truth is you had to beat Bradley to even put yourself into this situation. And you come down and you take care of Bradley, and it was another one of those games where I thought both teams played well, and I didn't quite think it was the game that it was over there, maybe because it was a little slower paced, and from that standpoint, there was some intensity lacking in certain parts of it because somebody was just holding the ball. But I thought it was still a very well-played game.
Believe it or not, in many respects, I felt that would be the harder of the 2 to win. No, I shouldn't say that. It would be the harder of the 2 emotionally to deal with the situation. Winning and losing, I didn't look at it that way. But we'd just come off the 2 losses, and we hadn't played very well. We had let the lead slip on us. A loss now just takes us totally out of it. It was a tough week, and we battled the flu a little bit, and as a result of that, at times we had about 6.5 kids at practice. And I went through this once before with a team in Indiana, and that's hard, boy. And I think the thing that got us through the Bradley game was that never once during that entire period did people start pointing the finger at each other or getting on each other. It was, look, it's our fault and that kind of thing. And so preparation was difficult. It was somewhat tentative. And I said to the kids on Wednesday, we weren't very good on Monday, and we were better on Tuesday, and then we slipped on Wednesday. And I said to the kids on Wednesday, I said, now look, I know you're not trying to screw up or to lose this game. I said, now you gotta quit playing like every mistake you make out here is going to cost you the ball game. You've got to play aggressively, and you can't internalize your errors. And so we went into the game Thursday a little bit tentative, and yet a very hard-fought ball game. And you could tell on Friday that they in no way, shape, or form felt that they had the game won at Tulsa, but it was almost like a little bit of the monkey was off their back. They felt better as a group, and they knew it would be a very difficult ball game, and they knew they could lose very easily, and yet there wasn't that overriding pressure that's on you after you let momentum slip away from you.
I think Creighton takes some of that pressure off you, too, when Wichita State loses, because now you have to win to finish in first place, yet when you lose, you're not going to drop back into a tie with Wichita State, so everything's geared towards winning as far as from an emotional standpoint goes.
That could be fairly accurate, and it's certainly, when I went in and told the team in the locker room, though, I said, Creighton beat Wichita tonight regardless of what happens on Saturday. I said, we're going to at least finish in second place. There was really no reaction. It was kind of just, okay, and that kind of thing. But needless to say, I would be the last to say that it didn't have some kind of effect. But the overriding issue was that we got through the game and that we won and we got a little bit of the monkey off our back. And I told the kids, I said, now look, you get this thing back. That doesn't indicate that you are going to beat Bradley, but it just stay together. And I thought in the Bradley game probably, and not in a long, long time, had I ever seen a group of youngsters stay together, both adversity as well as good plays, and as well as those kids did throughout that entire contest. And they were constantly with each other, constantly communicating with me, and it was really a close-knit. It was almost like we rallied around each other and just pulled ourselves through. Interesting sidelight that I think our fans might appreciate. With about 3 or 4 minutes to go in the Tulsa game, there was a timeout, and Hank interrupted me, and he said, now look, he said, if we lose this game, he said, let's go out losing, let's go out together, and let's go out fighting. And he said, let's just stay together, and let's just fight our hearts out. And I really thought that helped the kids. We were still cognizant of the fact that we could slip, that we could lose, but his comments were, let's just stay together, and let's just fight, and whatever happens, happens. And I thought that helped us in the last little bit.
Okay, that win against Bradley was 6 in a row over our neighbors in Peoria. Let's take a look at the highlights of that game.
Inside of 14 minutes, Redbirds by 2, and here we go. McKinney, inside is Ward, scores! Far side, fakes the shot. Now he'll pull up and score! Johnson now with the basketball. Duncan from way outside, good! Duncan. McKinney with the basketball. Inside is Ward, hook shot, scores! Duncan, not a dunk, or rather Johnson to Duncan. Duncan on the move, scores! 55-44 with 10 seconds left. Harden lays it off to Davison, and he scores. But that's Burnett. He's got 6. I think he was 3 for 3 tonight, and that's the ball game. 55-46 is the final score. And streamers come all over the court. The Redbirds have taken 6 in a row from the Bradley Braves.
Final score of the game was 55-46, and again it put Illinois State in a place where they could beat Tulsa in time for the co-championship of the Missouri Valley, which they did, and all of that has led to just a lot of excitement. We'll come back with a story about that excitement from Jim Collins in just a minute. The championship, or co-championship of the Missouri Valley Conference, the way you did it, I thought, was add a little bit more feeling to the whole thing, coming from behind, as opposed to losing the last game and dropping into a co-championship. I think this is probably the better way to do it if you're going to do it.
Well, maybe you're an expert on those things. I really don't know. But I will say this, and I believe this, that needless to say, if we don't stumble in Southern and then at Indiana State, then we have a chance to win it outright. But we did stumble. But who's to say if we hadn't stumbled that we would have been as good in the last 2 games? Who's to say that we didn't need that in order to just really tighten the screws down a little bit? It'll always be conjecture, and we'll never know. I mean, the point is that we find ourselves in a co-championship situation with a very good basketball team, and as you've already mentioned, a basketball team that has only lost 3 times, and 2 of them to us, and the other one was to Wichita. And so it's been a good regular season for us, and there aren't going to be that many times. You know, I've been in college coaching now 11 years, and that's only my 4th conference championship, 2 of them co and 2 of them outright. So even my percentages aren't real good. So and most schools aren't. So I'm happy for the university. I'm happy for the university community. I think, you know, it gives them a different, it puts them in a different position than they've ever been before. And I'm pleased that there have been a group of youngsters that have experienced what I, as a coach, have experienced. And it's a unique thing. I told the kids before the game, I said that this will live with them if they're able to win it, and they'll recall all of the moments from starting on Monday and walk through the whole thing many, many times as they grow older. I'll tell you what else was interesting. I look over just before the game starts, and Anthony Jones is in the crowd, and I turn around and I look up, and there's Ray Mullane on the bench, and I didn't know either one of the kids were going to be there, and I'm pleased because they were a part of it early, along with Dwayne, and you know, here it is, the whole thing, and they're right there with us.
7,801. We're here at Horton